We are no longer in the position where we think of D&D as an addition. It's just...
This game is whatever you want it to be. So while my group has technically been playing this modern classic 5e adventure, we're not exactly playing Dungeons & Dragons 5e anymore, because we've implemented a bunch of extremely simple, borderline lazy house rules that have made our experience at the table more fun and already created some awesome RPG memories. So I want to share a few of these homebrew ideas with you, because I'm Bob. This is where we learn how to have more fun playing RPGs together, and this first house rule is not actually a rule. It's the absence of a rule. We are almost entirely ignoring the concept of movement speed.
That was way too fast.
4.
Yeah, my first ever D&D group played this way, with mostly theater of mind and a GM or a player, sometimes sketching maps on blank pieces of paper, and by golly, does this speed up the game. Don't get me wrong, it can be totally fun when you are measuring those distances and it turns out you truly have exactly enough squares of movement to run into the cavern, leap over a small chasm, and strike the goblin boss. But let's be real. When a character tries to pull off something like that, stopping to count a bunch of squares completely kills the momentum when your GM could have just said, yeah, you make it, or you can probably make it, but roll a strength check to make it even more dramatic. Lots of indie games use this method because it's just easier for players and GMs. Some games define specific zones like near for melee and far for ranged attacks, but after 4 or 5 sessions, my group hasn't even needed to make that distinction. It's just been really smooth, and the proof of concept for this not a rule house rule was when my party got attacked by like 10 goblins running through the halls of Cragmaw Castle, and I didn't track a single foot of movement because it would have compounded into so much granularity and sucked away not only the momentum of that combat sequence, but also a huge chunk of our game time. After the session, when the other players left, my wife was like, wow, that was a lot better without tracking movement. And when we met up the next week, one of the other players independently said, you know, it was cool how we didn't worry about movement speed with those goblins. That would have taken a lot of time. Seriously, for years I've heard people say it saves so much time to roll attack and damage dice together, or to use static monster damage. But I think people forget about the time wasted on movement, because most of the time, neither characters nor monsters even move during combat. Therefore, this anti-house rule of freely moving around the battlefield goes hand in hand with another rule that we cut from the game, and I bet you can already guess what it's going to be, so go ahead and write it in the comments or share one of your favorite 5e hacks while I tell you about this video's sponsor, Roll for Your Life. The ultimate creative tool for role players, daydreamers, and storytellers alike, this hardcover book will contain over 200 pages of random tables and full-color illustrations to walk you through the creation of unforgettable characters, locations, and items with nothing more than dice, a pencil, and some paper. Unlike most RPG supplements, this book spans multiple genres of fiction, helping you create not only wizards, dragons, and taverns, but also pirates, ray guns, mutants, and noir detectives. It really seems like a great inspirational tool for thinking outside of the D&D box, so be sure to check out Roll for Your Life on Kickstarter through the link below. Alright, did you guess it? Opportunity attacks? You got it? Awesome. Yeah, dropping attacks of opportunity has been on my to-do list for probably like a year. I've just grown to dislike how during most D&D combat, even when using a grid and measuring out how far you can move, nobody ever moves. Ranged guys stay safely at range, while melee guys are locked in melee because if they move, their opponent just gets a free attack for no good reason. Hear me out. Yes, it makes sense that if you turn and run, you leave yourself vulnerable for a second. But how come that suddenly enables even the most combat-inept creatures to gain a whole extra attack for just that round? Where is that attack every other round? So overall, this combination of not tallying up 5-foot squares, not giving melee fighters this random free attack, and not using the standard flanking rule because that's another reason people get locked into set positions, has made my group's combat gameplay way faster and smoother than anything I've experienced in Dungeons & Dragons since my very first campaign when we just didn't know those rules existed. I'm not saying gridded combat is bad or flanking is bad. It can create cool strategic moments, and we're still kinda using flanking, but you have to be fully surrounded. I'm just saying that if you find yourself frustrated about not being able to attack the goblin because it's 31 feet away, you should give this style a chance. Now, this third house rule works very well in concert with the two we just talked about and with the fourth house rule in this video, but I should point out here that you can use any of these one at a time to test them out, use all of them like I've been doing, or use none of them because you've tried them all before and they just didn't feel fun at the time. That's fine. However, this is the one your players may enjoy the most. I've made almost every monster and bad guy weaker than they're supposed to be. What? But Bob, 5e characters are already so powerful, and I thought you were getting into old school D&D stuff where the adventurers are supposed to get TPK'd every time they walk into a dungeon. Not exactly. I do crave the tension and sense of danger that comes with a few bad guys being able to take out the party. But I do still want my players to feel powerful as their characters, and mostly I just can't stand it when everybody is missing attacks because the ACs are too high in 5e, or when a level 1 combat takes forever because a box told me that a bugbear should have 27 hit points. Besides, the context here is very important. This module is supposed to run from levels 1 to 5 for 4 to 6 players, but we're doing only level 1 to 3 with only 4 players, and we've done about half our sessions with only 3 players. So where I could have just reduced the number of monsters in each location, I decided to tweak their stats instead, and it has been a lot of fun. For example, one goblin in D&D 5e is supposed to have armor class 15 with 7 hit points and attack with +4 to hit, 1d6 plus 2 damage. My goblins have armor class 10 with 3 hit points and attack with +3 to hit, 1d6 damage. This means every time one of my characters attacks a goblin, they will very likely hit and kill that goblin. And if you've ever read or watched Lord of the Rings, you know that's what's supposed to happen when an adventurer attacks a goblin. If we started at level 0, these goblins would still be a serious threat, and that makes sense for my interpretation of goblins, which are all about overwhelming their opponents with strength in numbers and really only being fearsome to untrained peasants and villagers. That's why goblin village raids are in 9 out of 10 player character backstories, because there were no adventurers around to take them out one by one. Speaking of one by one, that's a hint for the fourth house rule, but I do want to highlight one problem I had with this one first. The average roll on a d20 is 10.5. Let's even round up to 11. And my goblin only has +3 to hit with its attack. So my average goblin attack roll is 14, and even at level 1, the lowest player character's armor class was 14. So each of my goblins really only had a 50-50 shot of hitting my weakest player character, and I happened to roll very poorly during our first session, so there were still a ton of missed attack rolls that night, and almost all of them were mine. Therefore, my players had a great time, but if I were to do this again, I would probably increase the goblin's attack bonus to +4 or even +5, and potentially decrease their damage from 1d6 to only 1d4. This probably would have increased the excitement by being a truly back and forth battle, but it still would have allowed my level 1 characters to gauge how many hits they can take before they may need to run away, or at least move from melee to range, because they can totally do that without taking an extra attack from one or more goblins. And you know what? There was one time where a bugbear ran past 2 player characters and one of their animal companions, so I just let them choose one character who could take a free attack. Anyway, if you want to try out these lowered monster stats, I used something similar to Runehammer's 5e hardcore mode. Armor class equals 10 plus CR, hit points equal 10 times CR, attack bonus equals CR. However, the lowest I went for hit points and attack bonus was 3, and I typically just cut their HP in half or even quartered it instead of basing it on CR. In addition, I took away any flat modifiers to damage rolls, and for whatever weapon they were using, each monster just used one kind of die. Goblins used 1d6 for daggers, swords, and biting. Bugbears used 2d8 for maces, clubs. You get the idea. So these low monster stats were one reason that a level 3 player character was able to kill 4 ghouls with a single attack roll, but the other reason he was able to do that was the fourth house rule, making critical hits actually critical. This one is probably the easiest to implement on its own, and it evolved very naturally from our gameplay. One of my players is basically brand new to D&D, and at some point in an early session, he was facing a line of goblins with his bow, scored a critical hit, and asked me, "Wait, can my arrow go through and hit more than one goblin?" Which is a perfectly normal question for anyone who hasn't been indoctrinated with the rule that you can only ever strike one target at a time. And exhibiting the behavior of what I like to think is a reasonable GM wanting my player to have a good time, I said, sure, since they have the same AC, if you roll max damage on one of the dice for this crit, any excess damage will roll over to the next goblin. And he did roll max damage on one of the dice for his crit, killed 2 goblins with 1 arrow, and all of my players thought it was awesome. So that's one way to handle it. But because my players really like this effect, I made it even easier. Now, whenever one of my PCs rolls a critical hit, any excess damage can roll over to another target with the same AC or lower. Then with this house rule, in our last session in Wave Echo Cave, where my level 3 party was pinned between the end of a tunnel filled with 4 remaining ghouls and the opening of a chamber where a flame skull was floating above 8 slowly rising zombies, that fighter went for the ghouls, and he crit. So our level 3 human fighter, literally one of the pre-generated characters straight out of the box, ran with the tip of his sword against the tunnel wall, sparks flying behind him, taking down one ghoul, then another, then sweeping around and killing a 4th ghoul because they were probably within regular movement speed of each other. They only had 5 hit points each, and of course, everyone at the table loved it. So by letting fun steer the creation of a few simple house rules, we allowed for this epic moment to happen at our table, and hopefully it's something that this new player will never forget. And if that sounds fun to you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with your game group, and consider joining Patreon to directly support this channel and get cool rewards like a new 5e one-shot every month with an original monster, magic item, and detailed NPC, access to our private Discord, early access to our podcast episodes, and as a trial this summer, bonus videos of me unboxing some RPG stuff and sharing my unfiltered first impressions. Patreon really is the best way to support what I do and this whole community, so thank you for your support, and keep building.